Hello and welcome to today's edition of Extraordinary Outcomes. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host and founder of Pitchling, the buyer-seller engagement platform. One of the biggest stumbling block in smooth buyer-seller communication is the ability to talk to all the stakeholders and for our champion in the buyer side to effectively communicate the value proposition to her team. It is next to impossible to get follow-up meetings with more influential team members, very complex for the entire buying committee to carry on conversation with the vendor side between multiple mail threads, umpteen collateral spread across various cloud drives, or for that matter, multiple vendors sharing multiple rounds of content and information. It is a big mess that the buyer has to manage. Pitchling helps manage all content and communication on a single unique link with secure buyer-side conversation, not visible to the vendor, and a buyer-side analytics showing team engagement to all members of the buying committee. What's more, each member of the buyer's team can follow, engage, or even opt out when they want without missing a beat. Want to know more? Sign up for a free one-on-one session, link in the attachments. One of the biggest challenges facing sales organizations is efficiently leveraging technology. We spoke with Tony Hughes last week, and this week we speak with Nicholas D. Kochkowski, author of The Sales Technology Landscape, to help you make sense of where this explosive growth in sales tech products is headed. Nicholas D. Kochkowski is CMO at Acquion, an innovative provider of conversational engagement software. Nicholas has extensive software experience and held diverse executive roles at companies of all sizes. He is a recognized industry expert in sales technologies and has authored a comprehensive sales tech market landscape. Nicholas, welcome to the show. I am really delighted to talk to you. I have known your work for many years now, and we have been sort of exchanging notes from time to time on LinkedIn. But I think this is a great opportunity to have you and speak with you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Before we actually go into the landscape, tell us a bit about yourself, what you're doing now, and what's sort of tickling your interest these days.
Yeah, so I'm a CMO of a company called Acquion. We're transforming one aspect of the customer engagement landscape with conversational engagement. We help B2c companies engage from sales, for service, for collection, using all available channels. So that's what I do these days. And I started about now 6 years ago tracking the B2c landscape, which was an interest that started when I was independent a few years ago.
So it started with the B2C landscape. How did that sort of transition, if I may say so, into the sales tech landscape?
So I actually started on the B2B front.
Right.
When I became independent, I worked as a fractional CMO for startups. And back then, the recurring frustration, desire from my clients I've heard is, listen, Nicholas, we see declining return of our inbound efforts and we want to move up market. So I said, well, there's a known solution to that, is prospecting. But back then, it was not natural for many entrepreneurs to lift the phone and reach out. Most people were much more comfortable doing inbound. So I started to say, yes, it's not easy, but there's technology. And I happened to know about a few technology solutions. So I started to build a list to fire email sequences, to call at scale, to track what people were doing. And one of my good friends who runs an intelligence site called Tokyo Networks told me, give me your list, give me the keywords, and I'll help you track the entire space. So from list, I started to build a blueprint, kind of an architecture of the stack, of the ideal stack that would plot all the available technologies. And I started with inside sales back in 2015. And a couple of years later, I expanded into the entire sales stack.
When you were looking at it, was it purely to help the startups you were working with as a fractional CMO? Was it purely for them, or is it because you suddenly saw that there is this explosion of technologies and people need to make sense of it?
Yeah, the initial lists was really what I needed for work, and I've done a numbers of a project in the space. I was always curious about it, but really what sparked my desire to do it and continue doing it after so many years is the complete explosion of the space. In 2008, there was clearly a change. First of all, I've seen, and I was back then CMO of a large software company. For the first time, I saw a CFO starting to look at sales efficiencies and effectiveness beyond meeting the numbers. There was a complete change with the rise of inside sales, trying to have a more structured approach, also use lower cost resources as part of the sales process. So a movement started in 2008, and it really triggered the birth of an entire new industry landscape. So when you think about it, the initial version of my landscape, which was arguably focused on inside sales, is about 350 participant, and the version I just released is over 1,200. So 6 years do make a difference.
You are a marketing expert, and you were building a sales tech landscape. Was that something because you felt that marketing and sales were not talking enough, or as a marketing professional, you needed to understand the sales space better? What was the trigger?
So, like I said, I've helped many companies in this space. And as a marketer, you want to understand the landscape. Likewise, I've done many projects in the customer service space. So I track the landscape. And when you look at what we do in marketing, for inbound, you want to constantly check keywords. You want to check what topics are of interest to your potential audiences. All those techniques are exactly the same I'm using to track the industry. So we have some common grounds. But the starting point was really an interest, a passion, I should say, for all those markets where technology can help businesses do a better job of engaging with their current and future customers. Back to the overlap with marketing on the inside sales front, we have a lot of overlap between sales and marketing. So it was a more tactical interest. But my real motivation was an interest for this emerging market that literally exploded.
That's true.
Since it started to take off almost a decade ago.
Right. So if you look at the parallels with the MarTech landscape, and that there is a lot of overlap with sales tech nowadays. It has grown from like 500 or 600 products over the past 10 years, 11 years. It has come to like 8,000 products. Yeah. Obviously, we're in the threshold of huge amount of leveraging of technology. Yet, the efficiency with which it is being done is nothing to write home about, especially when you go down to the end user. Their ability to use and leverage technology is for the lack of a better word, is questionable. The amount of money that is being spent on tech, a very, very little bit of that is going into actual training. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, first of all, I think when we look at sales tech, we have 3.5 constituents. So we have the sales reps, and a key focus is about enabling them higher velocity in their workflows, more intelligence about their markets and customers, better enablement, and growingly the ability to operate virtually or digitally. We have sales operations, and we have sales management.
Yeah.
Sales operation and management have different interests. Sales operation will be interested in having a very accurate pipeline and to show the accuracy by having strong proof points. Those elements might be less relevant to a rep. It can be also relevant to sales managers. And sales managers, they need to hire, they need to onboard, they need to grow their teams. So we have those three constituents. And I think when you look at the sales stack, it's actually the model I've adopted is 5 layers. The first 3 are mostly relevant to sales rep. The 4th to sales operation. And the last one is mostly relevant to sales manager. So the first is engagement. What technologies are available to engage with customers besides, I would say, a face-to-face. Then we have all the technologies that are productivity technologies. It can be quotes, it can be e-signature, it can be scheduling, it can be access easily to content to be able to share it. Those are technology helping someone, a rep, be more productive. Then we have the layers of sales intelligence, ranging from companies to people to intent. This is also critical for sales reps. Then we move to the CRM layers with the core CRM system of record, as well as numerous technologies that are about tracking both the pipeline and growingly the performance of sales. So forecasting, performance management are becoming their own category. Conversation intelligence is another one of them.
Yes.
And this is mostly relevant to sales ops. It's also relevant to, of course, sales reps that want to know how they're measured, and to sales managers. But the primary consumer of those technology is sales operation. And the final layer is all about onboarding, commissions, training. The primary customer of those technologies is actually the sales manager. Of course, training ultimately is for sales rep, but the way to marshal those technology will come from a mix of sales ops and sales management. The remaining half is actually CFO. Because when you think about it, there was one application before 2008. It was called CRM for Sales or Salesforce Automation. And the buyer of this technology was actually the CFO. And it was a way to actually know what the forecast would be. But when you look back then, who was buying Salesforce Automation or CRM for Sales, CRM, whatever you want to call it? It was the CFO. That responsibility has gradually shifted to sales ops, but it's good to remember. So back to your question, what I see is 2 things. First of all, some specific products might work very well for an individual, might not for another. So within companies, we see, depending on how sellers operate, we see the same technology being great or being mediocre. The other challenge is that sometimes the incremental improvement of a piece of technology is offset because the workflow of the seller becomes disrupted. And you need to think about the numbers of different applications that reps sometimes offered. And you need to basically switch from one to the other. And sometimes it's becoming difficult to manage an effective workflow across those different pieces of technology. So that's the second thing I'm hearing. Now, when we look at that, there's a third dimension that we want to look at, is the industry, because the adoption of those technologies is actually varies a lot from one industry to another. Technology embraced those applications, those software. Finance is second and is now in the mode with COVID and an accelerated transition to digital ways of doing business, fast-tracking the adoption of those technology, albeit in a little more structured way. And many other industries are actually lagging. So when you hear those feedbacks, you will notice that they often come from the technology space that has been embracing technology. Whenever there's a new piece of technology, sometimes it's recommended by your investors, you say, yes, let's try. And in reality, a lot of those companies are biting more than they can chew. And at the end, they try a little bit, but there's always an effort to put things to work, to integrate it. And when you have too many of those projects, you end up actually not doing enough for most of those technology to start yielding the benefits. So you deploy the technology, and over time you see usage kind of winding down to the point that a few years later people basically stop using it. But it's a very diverse picture, in fact.
Do you see any characteristic which is common in those which have been able to sustain the usage and those which have sort of tapered out?
Yeah, I mean, a structured approach to building the stack is one key element. The discipline of onboarding and driving onboarding and adoption based on who is the target user. So those driving principles are pretty key. So depending on the size of the company and the maturity of the sales ops function, what you see is at one point sales ops takes ownership of it. And you probably have heard about the term revenue ops, because many of those software are kind of a hybrid between sales and marketing. So the situation becomes even more complicated when you factor in all the software that marketing is buying and collectively is contributing to manage all the lead and opportunity workflows, and now more and more the customer success and development workflows, as well as giving visibility on all the operation. There was a movement that probably started in 2018, where I started to see CFOs saying, well, I see every year more and more expenses for sales. And there was also the impression, okay, if I talk to this one that has bought this application, I get one view of the business. If I talk to someone else, I get a different view. And of course, by definition, you will get different numbers if they are built using different application, different instrumentation stacks. So in 2018, somewhere around this, I started to see for company of a certain size with matured finance organization, the beginning of an ask. And it's saying, okay, tell me what's this single version of the truth and what's the return on investment of all those applications. It stopped something that we had in the early days where reps could expense on credit cards some technologies that kind of started to vanish. What I've seen is with COVID and with the way we work completely changing, that movement kind of paused. And now it's mostly rationalization of the stack is mostly coming from sales ops or revenue ops. It's going to be interesting to see. I suspect that once we start to normalize this new normal, if I may use those words, we probably will see a desire, a push, I should say, from also the finance organization to streamline and better integrate the stack, which will be better for everyone.
Right. Do you see any move towards applications which will allow people to have multiple applications in a single dashboard? Do you see any move towards that kind of technology?
With the web, you have tons of technologies that can be woven into a different desktop. So we've seen lately a lot of add-ons to Salesforce to facilitate data entry into Salesforce.
Right.
So Slack and those type of platforms have opened up APIs, created app stores to be able to provide capability not as yet another application, but a building block that that connects into whatever is your reference desktop. Today, when you look at the market, so Salesforce is definitely can be a reference desktop. You see the Slack, the Teams becoming for many their reference desktop, and you see sales engagement platform becoming as well a kind of a reference desktop. It's interesting to see there's a category that I call sales automation, for the lack of a better word. These are low-code automation technologies that can facilitate the workflow. So they take a piece of data from one application and will automatically move it to another. And because it's low code, it's kind of citizen developers. So it's pretty easy without triggering an IT project to connect two applications and better the overall workflow that may span across multiple applications. But I've seen that the prevalence, I should say, is that a rep will elect, I should say, an application he or she feels comfortable with as the main desktop and will expect the other capabilities to be injected into that desktop.
So you're referring to technologies like Zapier?
Yes, that's an example. Workato. There's a lot.
Yes.
Technologies of that nature.
Yes. I mean, there's definitely there is an explosion of connectors, so to say, if I may use that word.
Yeah.
As a technology. So I have a question. Do you think that we have reached a stage of complexity in the number of products that are coming out, which will essentially go back to consolidation under a large umbrella like Salesforce?
So, I think the poster child of federating different applications under what portfolio is today's ZoomInfo. So ZoomInfo became very focused and anchored into the sales intelligence space, and they've been an acquirer lately, sales engagement technology. I think the last company they bought was a chat company. So they have a dialer, they have email sequences, they have sales engagement technology, they have chat to do it all. So there's definitely a movement in part of the landscape to consolidate. Likewise, when you look at the so-called sales enablement, so training, onboarding, compensation, gamification, you have a numbers of of players that have been starting to consolidate. So Bigtincan, Exactly, Sysmic. When you think about those three companies, they've been acquiring many other adjacent categories or trying to consolidate to provide a more unified suite for one element of for one layer of the landscape. What's interesting is what's happening on the CRM front. So far, what I've observed is more the disaggregation of CRM. We spoke about automation. Salesforce automation is no longer called Salesforce automation, the great misnomer. It's called CRM, and sales automation is an adjacent category. Doesn't mean that you don't have within CRM automation, but right now the category is blossoming on the side. When you think about forecasting, the primary reason why sales CRM and Salesforce automation was bought in the first place was for forecasting purposes, like we discussed. And now you see an explosion of it's called revenue ops, revenue intelligence applications, and the core function is forecasting. So we've seen a movement to disaggregate the CRM capability. At the same time, Salesforce has been beefing up all its capabilities, to a lesser extent, Microsoft and Oracle. Now there are many predictions that those CRM players are going to become a little more acquisitive and aggressive, and not just add some capabilities as feature of their suite, but penetrate more directly into some of the categories of the sales stack.
The other question or area that I have a question about is, of course, COVID. COVID has pushed asynchronous selling, remote selling much more into the center than it was ever in the past. Do you see any unique categories evolving out of this scenario?
So far, not really. But sometimes there's a tweak in doing things that becomes its own category. What I've seen at high level is in the B2b space, things had become, before COVID, somewhat structured with inside sales and field sales. And that boundary is kind of blurring with techniques that before were used only by inside sales, now starting to be used by field sales. But there was a lot of repurposing of technology that was already existing. I mean, Zoom or WebEx, whatever you want to call it, was existing before. I think we'll see an evolution to make some of those technology better suited for example, the mobile phone. But for now, it's more an extension of existing categories with more field sales and inside sales both using the same activities and looking at the way to engage with customers as a kind of continuum. Video comes in the mix. Direct mail was rediscovered and gifting was rediscovered. So you see all these become yet another touch point, such as meeting in person. No, the big change I've seen, in particular in my current role at Acquion, is that this revolution that took place in the B2B space is now happening in the B2C space. When you think about it, most of the changes in the B2C space were driven by e-commerce. And e-commerce, incredible amount of technologies, but very focused on simple commodity type products. And suddenly with COVID, everything had to be procured through e-commerce. Branches were less visited. And as we exit COVID, as we reopen branches, we see less traffic. So financial institutions are thinking, okay, what am I doing with my branches? And you start to see personnel in branches that is being redeployed as virtual advisors to customers that are no longer visiting the branches the way they used to. So and today it's a mix of existing B2B technology or more specialized, such as the one we offer on the African front, that enable that. So the coming of those technology techniques and new ways of selling into the B2C space is what I see is the big impact of COVID.
I mean, obviously the buyer behavior has changed. I mean, your last example of people not coming to the branches and thereby the necessity of virtual advisors or virtual, service is apparent in B2C. Do you see the same kind of impact in the B2B space? Are buyers now asking for more asynchronous, more virtual discussions? And because I mean, with the fact that they were already doing some 50-60% of the journey digitally anyway, even pre-COVID, do you see that getting accelerated?
So I think from a communication standpoint, asynchronous ways of communicating are embraced by buyers and actually sellers, by I would say consumers at large across B2B and B2C. That's a convenience of a conversation. There's no more wait. You have the persistence of the conversation and context. So all this had started, not only in sales, but in service across every motions of customer engagement. So this is not changing. It's going to continue. What I see is an evolution vis-a-vis self-service versus assisted service. It's very interesting because in the B2B space, the focus was assisted selling, right? There's always a seller. And what we see is growingly B2B purchases that are shifting to a completely virtual model through app exchange, app stores. There's more and more B2B purchase decisions that are entirely digital from the standpoint of being self-service.
Wonderful. One final question. The growth from 300 to 1200 in 6 years, how many did you see die? How many actually went out of your landscape? Would you have any idea?
Oh, I don't know, but I do see numbers of companies. There was one category that completely disappeared, was predictive analytics. Predictive analytics completely disappeared.
And why do you think so?
Well, there are multiple reasons.
Okay.
There's actually an entire article from Mike Cabot, who was VP of sales at one of those companies. But think of it, C9, Lattice Engine have been acquired. Sales Predict, Mintigo have been hired. So, which means that what they're doing now is very different from what they were doing. For me, the big movement was when Radius was virtually shut down, although it bagged it bagged $100 million in investment, which is a sizable amount.
Yes.
So one category disappeared. It kind of morphed. Some evolved in the sales intelligence space, some evolved into the revenue stack around this forecasting. But I think the way the category was sprinkled around the stack and saying I'm gonna provide AI at all levels of the stack for all kind of reasons didn't work out.
Right.
There's companies day and out that come into pretty crowded spaces categories and that exit sometime. So there's a vision, and that's we only see the winners, but yeah, there is movement.
Great. And finally, what would you predict over the next 3 to 5 years are the categories to watch out for?
Oh, I'm always asked that, and I always do. I think sales guidance is one intriguing. Today I have it as a category, but it's also a set of features in multiple categories. But when you think about B2B moving for a large chunk into self-service, what will remain is much more sophisticated, complex selling. And B2C starting to bring assistance to e-commerce, both hinges on our ability to equip sellers with tools, which are not transactional tools. It's domain expertise. So that's one of the category that today I find very intriguing. But back to our discussion on the numbers of application in the stack and how you can build a single version of the truth. All what's happening in this revenue ops, revenue intelligence realm is very intriguing. I think at one point we will see a little bit of streamlining to provide a better instrumentation of the entire, of all the activities end to end.
Nicholas, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope that we'll be able to talk sometime again soon.
Okay, thank you for having me.
What has changed in the procurement processes in B2B companies, and what challenges are they facing in the complex post-COVID supply chain world? Our guest today will shed light on just that. Tanya Siari is one of the most global influential members of the procurement and supply chain profession. She is the founder and chairman of Procurious, the world's first online social network designed specifically for procurement and supply chain professions.
So I think what today's buyers are most worried about are these supply chain disruptions. So they want to know that their suppliers actually know what's happening in their tier 2, tier 3, 4, 5 supply chains, so that if they are geographically sort of concentrated somewhere or there's some weak link in the chain, that the buyer, that there's openness about that and that the buyer understands. So if they're sitting there and they see there's been a tsunami somewhere, they go, oh, that's going to impact me. Or, if they've only sourcing from China and then there becomes some sort of political or geopolitical risk there, then that's a problem too. So I think that transparency and being able to show your buyer that you can see the levels in your supply chain and you know where the weaknesses are, that you've got contingencies. So because they might not have the technology, but if you've got the technology and the visibility, that will give them a high level of trust.
We are very excited about the upcoming launch of our new community built to bridge the gap between buyers and sellers, Moxo. It is designed for buyers, sellers, and marketers to enable access to curated content, share ideas, and engage in conversations as a community. The space will be invite only, and if you want in, please write to us at moxo@pitch.link. That is MOXO@pitch.link. Time to wrap up for today. You will soon have access to the complete interviews in the Fixing the 5% Conversion Problem in B2e Sales and transcripts in the series. Keep an eye out for the link in the EXO newsletter. And thank you for watching. Until next time, stay well and craft extraordinary outcomes.